Hi there, welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we help you get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder of AirManual, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different. I was taking a little bit of a hiatus for the podcast after 119 episodes on the trot without one, essentially. Maybe one episode at Christmas where I didn't do one. I'm practicing a bit of what I preach. I am taking a long trip with my family over the summer in our motorhome, driving through Europe. Just me, my wife, our two adorable children, to just go and have some lovely time together. And we'll be gone for quite a while. So as a result, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't having to break up that time by doing some podcast episodes in between. So I'm doing a series of mini episodes focused around some really specific questions that I've been asked. I've been asking over the last few episodes. If you've got a specific question you'd like me to cover, then send it in. And so I've got some questions and I've grouped them a bit based on the kind of questions being asked. Some around sort of background of the podcast and some around sort of finesse details around how we produce it, but a lot of them around specific sort of deep dives and perhaps some of the content we've shared in the past. And so as a result, I'm looking forward to covering some of those questions in a bit more detail for you. For the next few episodes, they'll be short, and then it'll be resuming with normal programming with some incredible episodes as well, because we've still been going before the summer, making sure that we've got amazing guests coming up. Some have already been recorded, some at the point of this recording, some are about to happen, but the ones that have been recorded have been incredible episodes, and in many of them I've taken away such fantastic insights that I've been able to then start applying in my business. So I'm so looking forward to being able to share those, and so if you haven't already, please do make sure that you subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss those in future. But in this episode, I'm gonna dive into a particular question. The question that I've been given for this episode is, should I use videos for processes or should I use text explanations and so on? So this is a really interesting deep dive and relates to some episodes that we did. Episode with Marianne Page, episode with Clevitt, episode with Erin Mathie, where in those episodes we were talking about documenting your processes. And I've done some solo episodes on that as well. Documenting your processes and how important that is, how to do it and avoid it taking too long and making sure that you're getting value from it. Actually, in the episode with Adrienne Dorison from Run Like Clockwork, we talked about how to make sure things stay off your plate. So we've had quite a few episodes where we talked about what it means to document and delegate, essentially. And the question that I've been posed here is one that we sometimes get asked. It's one of my software businesses at AirManual, which is all about documenting process and so on, is that question, because I think it's tempting and really attractive actually for someone to say, well, if I could just video it, maybe that'll be a lot faster. And that's true. And in many cases, it's a really good place to start. And it's why Michalowicz, who I interviewed, I think episode 93, who wrote Clockwork, in that book, I know that he recommends recording what you're doing. And he often talks about how everyone's got like a phone in their pocket that they can use to record this stuff, or you can use screen recording or whatever, get it captured, get it passed over. Now, what's interesting is that one of the recommendations he has is record it, pass it over, but then get that junior employee to document that process as a series of steps. So even in that example where we're saying, yeah, video can be really great for very quickly capturing a process and what you're doing, you don't want it to only stay in that format. So before we go into what you can do instead, let's talk about why that is. So one of the first reasons is, in my experience, if I'm recording a process on a video or a client of mine is doing so, it's very easy to miss stuff. Things that perhaps seem obvious to you but aren't obvious to other people, or just you realize a step in the process that you perhaps introduce later on should have been earlier, or vice versa. And so it's not uncommon when you're recording that video for it, you get, let's say 4 or 5 minutes in and go, oh, actually, that should have been done back there, or actually there was a step that I did earlier on and actually it would have been more helpful if I did this, so let me redo it. And now you're in this trap of, do you now stop and re-record the whole video? Or do you just give the the video as it is and accept that the person following it will do it inefficiently and then change how they do it and have to remember and so on. And of course, that's just as you're recording it. The expectation is over time, that process should improve and there'll be other ways you want to change it. Do you re-record that video? Do you edit that video? That's time consuming. Also, even if just the tools that you're using change, is it worth then changing the video to reflect the fact the screenshots are slightly different and so on? And so you end up in this sort of trap around, you've created an asset in your business, essentially, that is pretty difficult to edit, amend, and change. And so what you really want, and what Mike Michalowicz recommends, is pass that video over and then get someone to capture it as a series of steps, which also makes it easier for you to A, review it, make sure it's accurate and in line with what you're expecting, B, make sure that they understand it because they've been able to play it back, but C, you can then make changes to it and grow it and improve it over time. So it's one of those things where video can be a great starting point, but it isn't where you want to end up. And there are cases in processes internally and with our clients where actually a video is really useful. For example, if you're learning how to do a sales call, a discovery call, seeing a video of someone do one is really helpful. But you wouldn't want that as the only way in which you learn how to do that, because otherwise it'd be hard to know from that discovery call, that sales conversation, which of these are standard questions that you'd expect a salesperson to ask anyone versus ones that are probing, that are specific because of the situation, or even throwaway that the salesperson would go, yeah, I probably shouldn't have asked that question. That wasn't that valuable. And so if you want to design your business on purpose, it makes it much easier if you can do that documented and so on. Which then brings us to the question of if there are some places where we do want video, but lots of places where we don't, where we just want it documented, is it faster to record it as a video and pass it over and then turn it into a process and then use that? Or is it possible for us to just document it as the checklist, as the process right from the beginning? Now, in my earlier career, I was a process consultant working with many organizations for many years. And often I would put brown paper up on the wall because it came in these big rolls, stick it along the wall, and then we'd use Post-it notes, or in other workshops we'd use a whiteboard, or in other workshops I tried to do it on a computer and move things around. On a computer was always way too slow to do those kinds of workshops back then. Back then, it was too slow to move little boxes around on a PowerPoint and then try and get the lines to rejoin. So it wasn't worth it. Instead, we would do it using Post-it notes. But of course, as you get to doing Zoom meetings and virtual stuff, that's not really possible. And so that created a bit of a challenge. And the way that we overcame it was actually making the way in which we document a process much, much simpler. Instead of trying to create this complex map, instead you identify a really high level. What are the processes that need to happen? So, for example, I've got a client at the moment where they're essentially a sort of wholesale business. And so you've got the process from receiving the initial order to checking that order to picking the products off the shelves and so on. And to fulfill that order, getting it to the client, getting the goods receipted and then invoicing and so on. Now, yes, we could draw that in a flowchart diagram with all sorts of arrows around, but actually it's as useful just to have that in a list of a sequential, this is broadly how it flows. And if there are exceptions, that can be captured within each of these steps, like what happens if you haven't got all the products that you need when you're trying to fulfill. You don't really need that with a big diagram at the top with a load of arrows around. You can deal with that within that process. And so when you then zoom into that individual process, like picking the products to be shipped, you can then actually capture that as quite a simple checklist. So review what the order is, check whether we've got availability, perhaps on the system or literally by visibly. If we haven't, then go follow our process to order some surplus or whatever it is, or check with another base, whatever the process will be. But then assuming it is, then put that onto a pallet and move that pallet there and so on. So those can be a sequence of steps. And that's really easy to capture quickly. Like literally capturing those steps and then reordering them where you need to, or adding some detail where you need to, can be really fast. And it's the reason we built AirManual to do that. But even if you're using a Google Doc or a Word doc, in relative terms, you can manage that through bullet points and just moving stuff around. And that keeps it simple enough that you can do it pretty fast. And so that's a question, is whether actually, is it faster to just capture it straight into some form of simple checklist rather than do a whole video, then pass that to someone else who then captures that and then passes it back and so on. So although part of me really likes the fact that you can use video to quickly capture these things, and there are certainly some things where that feels, if it's easy to do so, then great. Most of the time, particularly nowadays, I'm not doing that as my starting point. I'm using a template or something else to make that work for me. And I'm using AI to get a starting point for our checklist, or I'm just brain dumping, here's a high level, and then adding the detail, rather than starting with putting it as a video. So I hope that's useful. I think for a lot of people, that's an outstanding question. I should probably also say I have run tests on this. I have done side-by-side comparisons of recording it as a video and then passing it over to someone and seeing how quick it is for them to follow. Because that's one of the other things, by the way, I haven't talked about there, is that you might say, oh, but what if it's fast if I don't get the other person to capture it as a series of steps and we just follow the video? My experience has been, firstly, I've already talked about the issue of if you don't get it quite right in that first video or the order flow, but also for someone following, there's a lot of scrubbing back and forth in video. It's unlikely that they watch the video and just one play and it's now in their brain. They're going to have to pause and rewind and scrub back, and it's hard to find exactly where something happened in the video, and that's all painful. And then again, if there's anything that's not quite right, then they learn it wrong, and then they get to that part of the video that said, no, that should have been different. And also you've got that problem of what if you want to make any changes, how easy is that? And so it's using pure video on its own, in my experience, slows things down a lot, particularly for the learning of it and continuous improvement. And that's not what you want in your business. Particularly given that the alternative, I think a lot of people assume, is spending hours and hours and hours documenting it. Whereas in reality, you should be spending less than 15 minutes documenting, getting it at a high level, adding in a few little bits of detail where it's needed to stop mistakes, then get it handed over to someone, get them to follow it, watch them following it, and then fix anything that's not quite right, like that results in the question or they make a mistake. And now you've got the process handed over and you've seen that they've got it handed over, rather than if you're watching someone watch a video to try and do the thing, that's going to be really clunky and slow. So that's my opinion based on the research that we've done, the experience that we've had both internally and with our clients. But I'd be interested in your own views. What's your answer to this? How have you tried it in your business? What's worked for you? What hasn't? Have you tried using video? What did you use? What worked? What didn't? Have you started documenting using checklists? Or even have you taken the approach with the maps and so on? Tell me, what are the things that you've found easiest, hardest? Go onto LinkedIn, share it, do a post, tag me in, Alexis Kingsbury, with your experiences. I'd really love to know. But yeah, it's something that I think a lot of businesses struggle with, is even getting started. And so I think if you haven't got started at all and there's something you want to hand over, give it a go with a bit of a video. But then, you need to mature from that point. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a mess of a lot of videos, nearly all of which are out of date after quite a short period of time. And that becomes a new world of pain. So let me know your experience. That's been mine. But otherwise, thanks so much for listening. And I'll see you in the next episode. But otherwise, until next time, have fun.